This is a special presentation brought to you by the Daf Map, based on one of the lectures given by HaRav Yehonasan Berger Shlita. Please check out our other videos and shiurim at www.thedafmap.com.
Today's shiur begins at the second line from the top. We must, at the outset, apologize for a technical difficulty that caused our previous shiur to stop in mid-sentence. So, in order to appreciate what we are going to be opening with, it is absolutely necessary to be familiar with the end of our Daf Mem Daled shiur. So, we had mentioned at the end of our previous shiur that there was a machlokes, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda, as to the number of Sanhedrin members that must be present for the measuring process in the case of the Egla Arufa. Rabbi Shimon said 3, and that's learned from the word Zikenecha that appears in the Chumash Dvarim Perek Chaf Aleph Pasuk Beis, and Zikenecha is in the plural form. Minimum plural is 2, and you cannot have an even number court, so we add 1, making 3. Rabbi Yehuda disagreed and said you have 5. Of course, Zikenecha equals 2. The Vav of the word Vishovtecha accounts for another 2. That's a total of 4. You can't have an even basin, giving you a total of 5. The Gemara, at the second line from the top, asks, Ela Me'ata, if the Tanoim are coming to their conclusions based on the plural form of the words, well, when you look at those psukim, you look again at Pasuk Beis of Perek Chaf Aleph, we've included it on the side of the Gemara where it says, V'yatzu zikenecha v'shavtecha u'modetu el he'orim asher sviv v'sechalol. Well, in that Pasuk you have the word V'yatzu, the elders go forth to do the measuring. That is in the plural form, Shnayim. Minimum plural is 2. It said in the pasuk u'modedu, they went and measured, Shnayim, another 2. So that accounts for 4 more judges. Well, are you going to then say the Rabbi Yehuda Harei Kan Tisha? According to Rabbi Yehuda, we had the original 5 plus now add another 4, that really you have to have 9 judges for the measuring. And the Rabbi Shimon, who originally had 3 and we now accounted for another 4, Harei Kan Shiva. Now there really are 7 necessary. The Gemara says, no, don't conclude that. Hahu miboyale lichdetanya. These words, v'yatzu and umadadu, have a separate role to play. They're not here for numbering purposes. So the Gemara explains, Hahu miboyale lichdetanya v'yatzu means hein v'lo shluchein. They shall go forth, namely the actual members of the high court go forth for the measuring, and not through their agents. Umadadu, that instead tells us, Shafilu nimtza be'erlil le'ir, even if the body is found, be'erlil means clearly closer to one city more than the other, hayu moidedin, the measuring process would take place anyway. Shemitzvah lasot b'medida, there's a fulfillment of a Torah precept in doing the act of measuring. So that you see that the measuring is not a means to an ends. The measuring is actually an ends in itself. Masnisin delok Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov. Our Mishnah does not conform or agree with the opinion of Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov on this matter. Our Mishnah made no reference to the need to have a king or a high priest, a Kohen Gadol, present. Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov says otherwise. On the side, we have a topic heading that we're going to glance at shortly. But first, let's read the Tanaic source in which Rebbe Ozer ben Yaakov appears. Desanya, Rebbe Ozer ben Yaakov Omer, Zikenecha, Zu Sanhedrin. The word Zikenecha is a reference to the high court being present. So far, we don't see anything about numbers, but he uses Zikenecha to tell me members of the high court. This, by the way, is in contrast with the approach taken by Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon that we saw in our previous shiur, that in order to determine that members of the high court are the ones present for the measuring, that was derived from the word shoftecha. Rabbi Ozer and Yankov uses the word zekenecha. Shoftecha, what does Rabbi Ozer and Yankov derive from the word shoftecha? Ze melech v'kohen gadol. Present for the, or participating in the measuring must be the king and the high priest. It's interesting just to keep in the back of your mind, even though the issue becomes quite philosophical, and that's going a little beyond the purview of our discussion. But nevertheless, we're dealing with a hideous situation. A murder victim is found, and according to Rabbi Ozer and Yankov, we can say the whole nation comes to a halt. The king, the high priest, we saw, as well as the members of the high court, have to stop whatever they're doing and come and measure the proximity of the body to the nearest town. And we said, even if it's clear to which town the body is closer, nevertheless, they have to measure. Not their agents, not their slaves, themselves. The king and the high priest. Quite something to think about. Nevertheless, let's go on anyway in the Gemara. How do you see from the word shoftecha, melech and kohen gadol? So melech dichtiv. There's a pasuk that refers to a king. It says melech b'mishpat yamid oretz. The word b'mishpat is associated with the word shoftecha. Kohen gadol dichtiv uvosel hakohanim halavim ve'el hashofet asher yeh v'chulei. In this pasuk you see a reference to the kohanim, and it's taken to refer to the kohen gadol for our purposes, and in the proximity of the word hashofet in the same pasuk. We introduced Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov, and he mentioned the need for the high court. On the side, we have our topic heading. The Tat-Nosay reads, Biur Shitas Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov, a clarification of his opinion, Be'inyan Nochachus Sanhedrin B'Medida, regarding the need for the presence of the high court for measuring. Ha'im boy shehei sham kol ha-Sanhedrin? Oh no, does he require the entire court to be present? Which would make him quite different than Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda on this point as well, regarding the numbers. Or, no, maybe regarding the high court, Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov, will go like either Rabbi Shimon or Rabbi Yehuda, 3 or 5. Now, the Gemara. Ibayalo, Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov, b'melech v'kohen hu depolig. Is it so that he disagrees with Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda only with regard to king and high priest, avol b'Sanhedrin, but as far as the number of members of the Sanhedrin, the highest court, ik Rabbi Yehuda, maybe he holds like Rabbi Yehuda 5, ik Rabbi Shimon 3, sevirale, that would be his, Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov's opinion, oy dilmo, or possibly b'Sanhedrin nami polig, ad deika kulo Sanhedrin. With regard to the Sanhedrin as well, he takes issue with them, and he, Rabbi Ozer ben Yaakov, requiring the entire Sanhedrin. Omar of Yosef. Now, before we go on in the Gemara, just a word about structure. Rabbi Yosef says Toshma. He brings a Tanaic source. Notice we have a long marking, a long Toshma marking. This is all Rav Yosef's approach to the Gemara. He's going to come to a conclusion. He's going to conclude that for the measuring concerning Egla Rufa, you need to have the entire Sanhedrin present. Like choice bays that we just read, that namely where we read O Dilma b'Sanhedrin nami poli adi kula Sanhedrin. That's going to be Rav Yosef's conclusion. After the long marking, you'll notice Abaye enters the picture, and he suggests an alternative to Rav Yosef's conclusion. After Abaye, about 3 lines after Abaye, the Gemara at the end of the line, you'll see the word Tanya. Tanya kavosid Rav Yosef. But after all said and done, the Gemara is going to present a Brisa, Tanaic source, that will agree with Rav Yosef's conclusion. Let's say the attempt to answer this question on the part of Rav Yosef involves introducing a new topic, an outside topic, through which we'll then deal with the issue of the Sanhedrin and the measuring. On the side of the Gemara, we have a Tat-Nosay sub-topic heading. Zokein Mamre, the rebellious rebellious elder. What do we mean rebellious elder? Shecholek ala Sanhedrin. He issues a legal ruling at odds against the highest court. And he meets up with them outside the Beis Hamikdash. Bizman shemichutz milishkas agozis. Shepogash oisam bebeis pagi. The Gemara will refer to a place called Beis Pagi. There's a discussion in the commentaries what that refers to. It's an area that's associated with the outer perimeter of Jerusalem. Beis Pagi might be the forerunner of a place they call today Beth Page. The Zokein Mamre is a rebellious scholar in the sense that he is willing to take his opinion and his halachic ruling on a given matter. The Gemara discusses Zokein Mamre in Masechah Sanhedrin at much greater length, but there are certain areas of law that he happens to issue a ruling that disagrees, that is at odds with the Sanhedrin. He eventually can be charged with a capital offense because of his disagreement with them. That's by way of background. Structurally, after we read this Tanaic source, you'll see a double underlining scheme, which is explained on the side as Shlavei Birur. So stages of clarification. Be'inyan mispar ha-Sanhedrin sheyotzu lebei pagi be'inyan ha-Zokein Mamre. We indicated that the Zokein Mamre meets up with the high court at Beis Pagi, this outer perimeter of Jerusalem, and he disagrees with them over there. How many members of the court are there when he meets up with them over there in Beis Pagi? The other issue that will be touched upon here is a Zokein Mamre doesn't become a Zokein Mamre, doesn't become labeled a Zokein Mamre, a rebellious elder, unless he argues with the Sanhedrin when they are at location, namely at their official location, the Lishkas Hagozis, the chamber that is assigned to them, that's adjacent, that's attached to the Beis Hamikdash. If he disagrees with them and they're not in their chambers, so to speak, not at location, so he doesn't become labeled a Zokein Mamre. And we mentioned before, Zokein Mamre is someone that is actually liable to capital punishment. The Gemara. Omer Rav Yosef Tashma. Let's come and hear from the following source a response, a conclusion to the question of how many members of Sanhedrin are needed for the measuring by Egla Rufa. The source says, Motzon Zokein Mamre Abe Pagi. Motzon means he found them. And anyone who's a Gemara markings veteran knows very well that pronouns are something we find highly undesirable. So when we say he found them, he is the rebellious sage, met up with them, the Sanhedrin. Abe Pagi means not in the Lishkas Hagozis. They were somewhere else in Yerushalayim. Vehimro aleim, and he rebelled. He argued against them. That's himro. For our purpose, means is a rebellious ruling. He rebelled against them, refusing to accept their opinion. Yochol tehei hamro, also hamro, is that rebelliousness considered sufficient to label him a Zokein Mamre and then be liable to death? Talmud Lomar, the Pasuk says in that context, V'kamta v'lisa lamokom. That's what the pasuk says. Literally, you will get up and arise to the place. Malamid shamokom gorem. The presence of the rebelliousness, of the rebellion, of the argument that he has with them must be in the place, their place. The mokom, the place, gorem, causes him to become a zoken mamre. So we have a gezeres hakosov, we have a pasuk that will say frees him from becoming liable as a zoken mamre. Bear in mind, without the pasuk, I would have thought otherwise. When you see 99% of the time in the Torah, when a pasuk is cited, it's there because without it, I might have thought, or I would have thought something else. Okay, the Nofukama, how many members of the court were out there at Bei Pagi when this elder met them? He lema de Nofuk Miktsason. If you say that part of them, not all of them, some of them went out to Beis Pagi, and he met them and he argued with them. Dilma hanoch dika gavoy kavose svira lahu. Maybe those that are ika gavoy means that are inside, meaning those that didn't go out, those that remain in the Beis Hamikdash, those members of Sanhedrin that remained in the Lishkas Agozis, their official chamber, hold like this elder. And if that be the case, so you wouldn't have thought that he should become a Zoken Mamri in the first place. He's got support by the other members of the Sanhedrin. Elapshita de Nofuk Kulhu. It must be then that they all left, and he met up with all of them. Oh, and he contested their ruling. He argued with them. He argued with all of them. And without the pasuk of V'kamta v'lisa lamokom, I would have thought he becomes a zoken mamre by virtue of the fact that he's arguing with the entire high court. So the pasuk comes and says he is innocent. He's not guilty because it wasn't in the place. Ulamai. Okay, we've established that the pasuk is describing a situation, or let's say it's preempting a situation of him arguing with the high court, him, the Zoken Mamre, arguing with the high court in its entirety out there. What did they go out there for? If they went out for some optional reason, they went out for a picnic. And we're saying they all went out there. Well, mi motzu nafki, could that even be? That it's a picnic day for the high court, and they would all go out there. V'hoksiv, the pasuk says, "Shorech agan hasar al yechsar hamozeg." We're not going to preoccupy ourselves with the literal translation of this pasuk, but what we want to learn from it is, as it goes on to say, "She'im nitzrach echad mehem lotzeis." If a member of the high court for some reason had to leave the Lishkas Hagozis, he has a right, provided im yesham esim u'shloisha keneged Sanhedrin Tana Yotzei, if 1/3, the number here is 23 members. 23 is very close to 1/3 of 71, because 23 times 3 would be 69, and we have another 2, it would be 71. So the point here, the pasuk that we didn't translate mentions hamozeg. Mozeg has to do with wine dilution. 2 parts water, 1 part wine. So the amount of wine that's diluted represents 1/3 of the entire cup that will be drunk. We learn from this that 1/3, a minimum of 1/3 of the court must always be in the Lishkas Hagozis if anyone should want to leave for some kind of personal or optional reason. And v'im lav, if there aren't 23 remaining behind, eino yotzei, the judge cannot leave cannot leave the Beis Hamikdash. So the option of them having gone out in their entirety for something optional, that just can't be. Ela pshita ledvar mitzvah. Rather, the whole court went out there for a mitzvah purpose, something that was obligatory, and therefore the drosha from the pasuk in Shir Hashirim Shorach HaGanasar wouldn't apply. Okay, they went out in their entirety for a mitzvah. Lamai, for what mitzvah? Lav lemedidas egla Rabbi Ozer ben Yankevi. Is it not in fact for the measuring of the distance between the corpse and the nearest city in accordance with Rabbi Ozer ben Yankev? And this would show us that Rabbi Ozer ben Yankev, when he says the Sanhedrin are participants in the measuring, he means the entire Sanhedrin. And that would be like possibility Bays that we had above when we originally raised the question. We said, "O Dilmo b'Sanhedrin nami polig adi kukula Sanhedrin," that he argues with Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon even regarding the numbers of Sanhedrin, where Rabbi Ozer ben Yankev, requires the entire Sanhedrin. So with that hesber, we can answer our question. We also understand the source where the Zokein Mamre had in fact met the entire Sanhedrin, disagreed with all of them, but not in the Beis Hamikdash. And without the pasuk of Akamt Lisa Amok, I would have said, what difference does it make where they are? The fact is, he's arguing with the entire Sanhedrin, and that should be enough to account for his guilt. And therefore, the pasuk says, not so. And as we said, how could it be that the entire Sanhedrin is not in the Beis Hamikdash? Because they had to go out for Medidas Eglah. Abaye lo. Abaye disagrees with Rav Yosef's conclusion. Dilma, maybe that which they all went out lahoisif alo ir valazoros. They went out for the ceremony that is necessary in order to expand the city of Jerusalem and if necessary the courtyards of the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. That has to do with increasing the area that will have a higher level of sanctity than the rest of Israel. For example, Meiser Sheni, the tithe that one separates from his produce on the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the sabbatical cycle, that produce is to be eaten only within Jerusalem. And when we speak about expanding the city, if you don't expand it according to the official rules and in accordance with the official ritual, so then you won't accomplish the expansion of sanctity. So the source says, expansion of the city and courtyards of the Beis Hamikdash, cannot take place unless you have the court of 71. So if in a situation like that, the entire court was out there expanding the city, it involves marching around the city, but the details of that are explained in other Gemaras. That necessitates the presence of the entire Sanhedrin, and if the Zokein Mamre met up with them over there, so he would not become a Zokein Mamre. But as far as Abaye is concerned, the entire court going out for the measuring of the Eglah Rufa, that we don't see here. Tanya Kavosei Rav Yosef. Here we have a Braisa, a Tanaic source that states, like Rav Yosef concluded from the Mishnah above. What does the Braisa say? Motzon abeis pagi v'himrale, and the Zokein Mamre met up with them at the Beis Pagi. He disagreed with them. Kagon sheyotzu lemedidas egla or lahoisif alo irva al zoros. Of course, we dashed underline medidas egla. This is the heart of the support for Rav Yosef, where the entire court went out for measuring for egla rufa purposes or for adding to the city. Would his disagreement with them lead to his becoming labeled a Zokein Mamre and guilty of a capital punishment? Talmud Lomar v'kamta v'olisa malamed shamokom gorim. No, he would not become a Zokein Mamre, because that would be so only if he disagreed with them in the mokum, in their place, namely in the lishkas hagozis, the chamber designated for the court in the Beis Hamikdash. Now we go back to points mentioned in the Mishnah regarding the body. And on the side we have a topic heading Tat-Nosay, Nimtza Tamun Basodeh. If a body is found buried, means covered in the field. The issue of Tamun Basodeh affects two quite unrelated areas of halacha, but they're both going to appear in our Gemara. Number one, Be'inyan Halal, regarding the murder victim, and number two, Omrim, sheaves of grain, Lagabi Shikha, regarding the halacha called Shikha. Shikha literally means forgotten. There is a tithe that the poor are entitled to, and that tithe, amongst others, is called Shikha, and that's in the event that a person, when harvesting his field and gathering the sheaves of grain, he walked by some sheaves while in the act of picking them up, and he walked by a couple of them, and once you walk by forgetting to pick them up, to gather them in, they become shikha. There, of course, there's quite a bit more detail to that particular mitzvah of leaving the shikha, but for our purposes we gave a general introduction. The Gemara quotes from the Mishnah, Nimtza Tamun Bagal al Tolui Be'ilan. If the murder victim was found buried under a heap of stones or suspended hanging from a tree, lo hayu orphan, there would be no eglo arufa ceremony. Leimo masnisin Rabbi Yehuda hi v'loi rabbanan. Can we conclude that our Mishnah that said prat l'tomun, we exclude that which the body that's covered over from the eglo arufa ritual? In other words, covered over is different than finding the body simply lying in the field. So that conclusion would seem to parallel Rabbi Yehuda and not the Rabbanan. Where do Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan appear? In the topic of shikha, of the forgotten sheaves. Desanya, v'shochachta oimer basodeh. If you forgot a sheaf of grain in the field, so the Torah says you must leave it for the poor man. Prat l'tamun, to the exclusion of an oimer that was, let's say, left in the field, but it was covered over. It was underneath something. It was tamun. Tamun means hidden. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that when the pasuk uses the word basadeh, it's to the exclusion of tamun. We saw that in our Mishnah as well. That since the Torah says basadeh, I should say the Mishnah itself said the word ba'adama v'lo tamun. It's true, the Mishnah also, the pasuk also had the word basadeh, which was used to exclude the floating body. But whatever the case is, if something is tamun, so it's excluded. We saw in our Mishnah the body being tamun makes it such that it's excluded from the egla rufa ritual. A sheave that's covered over is excluded from the mitzvah of shikha. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. V'chachomim omrim basadeh l'rabbi sisatamun. That since the Torah said b'shachachta omer basadeh, that comes to include even the hidden sheaves. So the question is, shall we say that our Mishnah that said prat l'tamun regarding the found body is in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda only and not the Rabbanan? Omar Rav, afilu tema Rabbanan. Our Mishnah that excluded the body that was tamun from egla rufa can agree with the Rabbanan by shikha. Hacha minyonei dekra, hasam minyonei dekra. These halachas are governed by psukim, each one in its own context. So here we look at the psukim in their context, and there the psukim are viewed in their context. Hachami inyonei dekra dichtiv, The pasuk here by Egla Arufa says, Ki imotzei cholol. When a corpse which has been murdered is found, kol hecha de mishtakach, wherever it's found. So that would be an inclusive expression, inclusive ruling, wherever it's found. Bo adama prat letamun. So once you said ki motzei cholol, very much inclusive of wherever it's found, comes along bo adama to limit and exclude tamun. So that's why in our Mishnah, a tamun body is excluded from Egla Rufa. V'hasam me'inyana dekra, there by shikha, you have to look at the pasuk in its context. Dichtiv ki siksor ktsircha b'sodecha v'shachachta oimer. The pasuk says when you harvest your field and you forget sheaves, shikha dumya de. There's a juxtaposition of words, shikha and kotzir, telling us to say the shikha is to be compared to kotzir. Kotzir means the harvest. Ma kotzir begolui, just like that which is harvested is visible. Af shikha begolui. So too, in order to be classified as shikha, it has to be something exposed. Kosav rachmona basodeh l'rabos es hatamun. Before you get to the word basodeh, what conclusion did you reach? It must be exposed, just like kotzir. What is gained by adding the word basodeh? With that, we come to include tamun. So notice we have like a push-pull situation in terms of pasuk power. The pasuk with the corpse, the murder victim, started with an inclusionary expression. The follow-up word then will do the opposite, will exclude. In the case of shikha, we started off with an exclusionary situation, limiting you to that which is exposed. Therefore, the follow-up word will then include more. The Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who said that bo adama is prat l'tamun, nami tepukle mishikha dumya de kotzir. Couldn't Rabbi Yehuda have used this, we'll call this logic, or this method of conclusion, of juxtaposition of words, that with the word v'shachachta omer is compared to ketzircha basodeh? Just like kotzir is exposed, so too the shikha must be something visible and not tamun, which Rabbi Yehuda said, prat l'tamun. Why doesn't he learn from there? Why did he say that the shachachta omer basodeh is the source of excluding tamun? The Gemara says, in hachinam, you're right. From the juxtaposition of shikha and kotzir, I could in fact exclude tamun. Vela basodeh lomali. So then what will Rabbi Yehuda do with basodeh, which up till now we thought was his basis for excluding tamun? Answer, miboy alei l'rabois shikchas koma. The word basodeh has a separate role. It comes to include shikchas koma. Koma is a reference to standing grains. What does shikchas koma mean? So Rashi at the top of the which ordinarily be the Tosfos column, the top line, Rashi says l'shikchas koma shim shochach zovis achas liktzor. If he forgot to harvest a corner of the field, koi Allah below soshuv l'kachto, he is included in the prohibition, or that corner is included now in the prohibition of going back to going back to harvest it. V'hochi mashma v'shochachta oimer oi v'shochachta basodeh. Shikha can be either on regarding harvested sheaves, that when you came to collect them, you walked by some, that's shikchas omer, or shikchas sodeh, as we described, you were harvesting the field and you left one corner unharvested through having forgotten to harvest it. So that's what basodeh does for Rabbi Yehuda. For Rabbanon, shikchas koma menolahu The Rabbanan are now asked, where do they learn Shikas Koma from? Answer, Nafka Lahu, the Rabbanan will learn it, Miki Siksor Kitsircha Besadecha Veshochachta. Rashi explains how the Rabbanan derive that. Nafka Lahu on the third line from the top, Mi Besadecha Veshochachta. Kri Bey, you can read that pasuk as Sheshochach es Ktsas Sodehu. He forgot some of his ground. What does it mean to forget your ground? It means to forget harvesting part of your ground. The Gemara continues. The Rabbi Yehuda miboyalei licht Rabbi Vo Amar Rabbi Ozer. Rabbi Yehuda needs that pasuk of ki siksor ktsircha besodecha v'shachachta for Rabbi Avo's teaching. The Amar Rabbi Avo Amar Rabbi Ozer prat l'shetzafu omrim l'soich zdei chavero. The pasuk tells me that there is no shikha in a case that sheaves ended up in your neighbor's field. The wind blew some of your sheaves into the neighbor's field. They are not going to be categorized as shikha. The Rabbanan, where did the Rabbanan learn that from? Where did the Rabbanan derive they learn it from the change of words mi basodeh besodecha. Instead of saying basodeh, it says besodecha. We take a look at maybe just another few words in the Gemara of Rabbi Yehuda, besodeh besodecha lo mashmalei. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't see any novel, any chidush, any novelty in this choice of word, besodecha instead of sodeh. So we have both Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan agreeing that Sofo l'toch stei chavero is not going to be shikha, but the question is, where does each one learn it from? The Rashi will start with on the third, fourth line from the top. Shetzafu omrim l'toch stei chavero she'noshva haruach, the wind blew ve'rimo es ha'omrim min ha'oretz v'tzifosan l'toch stei chavero. And it raised them, and through the wind they flew into the neighbor's field. V'shachan, and the owner forgot. V'kosovur she'enon shelo. His sheaves are right now in the neighbor's fields. He thinks they're not his own, so he doesn't think about them. That idea, nafka, that halacha, is learned mi besodecha. And the word besodecha is in the possessive form. In your field, the lo b'steich chavercha, the lo havu shikha. When your sheaves are in your friend's field, it doesn't become shikha. That is how Rabbi Yehuda learns this din of Rabbi Avo. V'Rabbanan miuta d'stei chavero, the exclusion of sheaves, your sheaves in friends' fields, nafka lahu. The Rabbanan learn it from Midahave lemichtav ki siksar ketzircha basodeh v'shochachta uksiv besodecha. It's a very, very fine difference. The Rabbanan learn it from the change of expression, from opting to say besodecha instead of the word basodeh. Not necessarily, though, from the fact that besodecha is in the possessive form. That approach was Rabbi Yehuda's approach. The Rabbanan, it's from the change of word approach. And to that, Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't see anything there. I don't see that as being as serving as a source to exclude Sofo l'soch stei chavero. We continue in the Gemara. You'll notice we have employed a diamond marking here, and a few lines later, on the side under the Mivneh heading, we indicate shtei she'elos. There are two questions that are raised in the Gemara. Echad be'inyan shikha, hasheni be'inyan shnei chalolim. One regarding shikha, the topic we've been discussing most recently, and the other going back to the topic of bodies found, two bodies found. Shameshutuf lahem, the common denominator in these two questions, havi inyan tzof, echad al gabi chavero. This concept of tzof literally means floating. We saw a literal use of tsafu in the Gemara and Rashi. The wind blew them, so it's as if they floated over to the neighbor's field. The concept of tsaf can also mean something that's not lying directly on the ground, but is on top of something else. Now the Gemara. Boy Rav Yirmiyah, tsafu oimrim l'soich sodehu mahu. Sheaves of grain, and here you can see that we're not going to use the word tsafu in terms of the wind blowing something, but rather sheaves of his own field are lying on top of something else like a stone. We'll introduce later the issue of sheaves lying on top of other sheaves. What is the din regarding that, we'll say that upper sheave, the sheave that's lying on a boulder in your own field that you happen to walk by, does it become shikha? When you say walk by, it means you were gathering your harvest and you walked by the sheave or two sheaves that were sitting atop a rock. Is that considered shikha? The analysis. Avir sode kesode dami, oi lav kesode dami. Do we say that the airspace of the field is considered like in the field? Or maybe not. You'll notice that we have a bracketed section. The reason for this was a technical use of the brackets. We have a starred note on the side. B'socha sograyim, within the brackets, yesh nisayon, there's an attempt, la'anots, to answer this question. Avol nidche, the attempt is rejected. Achrei muvo toshma kehemshich hanisayon lahashiv. After the brackets, another attempt will be brought in in an attempt to answer this question. So, with the structure in mind that within the bracketed section there's an attempt but then an immediate rejection, let's go now straight through the Gemara. Bori Rav Yirmiyah, we read the question already concerning Tsafu Sochte Chavero Mahu Avir Sode Kesode Domi, the fact that it's in the airspace considered sufficient and it would become shikha o lav kesode domi, or it's not considered in the field, and the sheaves don't become shikha unless they're forgotten, they're passed by the owner when in the field. Homarle Rav Kahana le Rav Popi. The Amrila, another version of names is Rav Kahana addressed Rav Zvid. But in both versions, Rav Kahana is the speaker. First version of names, he's addressing Rav Popi. Second version, he is addressing Rav Zvid. So Rav Kahana says, Tifshot lei midi Rabbi Avo Rabbi Ozer. Why not answer the question from his teaching? We had him just a couple lines above. Di Omar, what did Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Ozer say? Prat l'shetzafu oimrim l'soich stay chavero. When is there an exemption from something becoming shikha? That's when it's tsof b'toch stei chavero. The chavero in, when it's tsof b'stei chavero, then there is an exemption, l'toch sadeu lo. But within your own field, something that's tsof, like sheaves lying on boulders in your own field, that would not be exempted. And if you walked by it when you were gathering your sheaves and you walked by a sheave or two that was lying on a rock, too bad, you can't go back and take it. You have to leave it for the poor. So Rav Kahana attempted to answer the question that the soch sadeu in his own field is not exempt. It can become shikha. The Gemara says, is that a reasonable conclusion? Uletamech, according to your method of reasoning, of drawing inferences. So then, are you going to say the following? If you're going to quote Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Ozer on a rather literal basis and use that as your point of inference, you know what you're going to come out saying? When is there an exemption? When it's tsof b'sof stei chavero. And what does tsof b'sof stei chavero mean? It means it's lying on a boulder in your friend's field. Let's say it would be lying directly on the ground in your friend's field. Are you going to say that it would not be exempt then? That it would become shikha and you would not be entitled to take it? How can you say that if it's lying directly on the floor of your friend's field, it would become shikha, but the pasuk says it has to be in your field in order for it to become shikha? Ela, l'toch stei chavero, when you're dealing with sheaves of grain in the neighbor's field, vafilu munochem, even if they are actually lying on the floor. V'hai dekomat safu, the use of when Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Ozer use the word safu, it's simply the lo mishkachas lo elabet safu. You can't have a case of your sheaves in your neighbor's field without it having been blown over there by the wind. It floated over there. So the word safu, as it appeared in Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Ozer's halacha, wasn't a reference to sheaves of grain lying atop other things. And being that that's the case, we can't use Rabbi Avo and Rabbi Ozer as a point of inference to answer the question of tzaf within your own field. And when we speak about tzaf within your own field, we're not talking about the wind blowing it. We're talking about it's simply grains lying atop other things. Ta Shma. So we're back to trying to resolve Rabbi Yirmiyahu's question. Oimer shehichsik boy loilichoi leir. A sheaf of grain that the owner picked up with the intention of bringing it into town. V'nichoi al gabi chavero v'shochacho. And he took this oimer and placed it upon other sheaves of grain. And he forgot it. Hatachtoin shikha, ha'ilyoin eino shikha. According to this opinion, the first opinion, the lower one, the one that's hidden, that becomes shikha. However, the upper one does not. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon Shnehem Einon Shikha. Both of them do not become categorized as shikha. Hatachtoin mipnei shu tamun, the bottom one because it's covered over, and le'elyon mipnei shu tzaf, the upper one doesn't become shikha because it's tzaf. Then tzaf, we've already mentioned what that means. Ad kan lo pligi ela batachton. The disagreement that you see in this Tanaic source concerns only the bottom one. According to the Tanakama, the bottom one, the hidden one, becomes shikha, and according to the second opinion, it does not. Avol be'elyoin, regarding the upper ones, the sheave that was placed upon the others, divrei hakol lo havoy shikha. Everyone agrees it does not become shikha. So if you were to stop here, what would your conclusion be? That tzaf, Rabbi Yirmiyahu's question was regarding tzaf in your own field, it does not become shikha. As we go on in the Gemara, we're going to have in the next few lines, a rather vigorous give and take discussion. So we're going to be using a triangle, which we started using in order to answer the question. With the point facing up, that represents a response, an answer, and the inverted triangle represents a rejection. The Gemara here now rejects what we just tried to conclude. Shiny Hassam. That case is different. The case of the upper sheaves that we declared as being non-shikha, kefon de achsik be zocha be, since the owner picked it up, it became his and no longer an entitlement to the poor. The Gemara asks, well then, what the positioning of this triangle with the point facing up is an attempt to reject the rejection. Well, if the whole reason is because of Zocha, my irya al gabi chavera. Why does the source speak about it being placed on other grains? Afilu basodenami. Even if he lay it directly on the floor of the field. If the whole point of its non-shikha is because of possession, why was it important in the source to speak about it being placed on other sheaves? The Gemara says, in hochinami, you're really right about that. That it didn't have to speak about being placed on other sheaves. Even directly on the floor, it would not have become shikha because of zochaba, hichsikba zochaba. V'haitikotoni al gabi chavero, the source featured that example of the upper being upon other sheaves, making them the lower ones. Mishum tachton, because we wanted to focus on the bottom sheaves for the machlokes that was featured in the source. In other words, we had to create a situation of a tachton. How do you do that? By the ones that he picked up, not being placed directly on the floor, but being placed upon other grains. The Gemara says, is that argument really so? The reason that the upper one is not shikha, it's said in the source, because it's tzaf, not because he was zoichenet. So this, noticing the direction of the triangle, this would then reinstate the answer to Rabbi Yirmiyahu's question, that tzaf really is an exemption. The Gemara rejects this. Ema mipnei shu kitzaf. The expression of the elyon being exempt is because it's kitzaf. What does that mean? We take a look in the Rashi. Mipnei shu kitzaf. We're looking at Rashi about a third of the way from the end of the Rashi commentary. Mipnei shu kitzaf, shu potter. It's exempt from shikha. Al shehichsik bo, because he took possession of it. Where does tzaf come into the picture? Ki'ilu hoya odenu tzaf me'al hakaka umunach biyado. It's as if even though you've already placed it down, but it's as if it's floating over the field, being held in your hands. So the exemption, as you can see through learning the Rashi, is not because it's placed upon something else, but rather because you took possession of it. So, as far as Rav Yirmiyahu's question is concerned, it certainly does not receive a direct answer in this give and take. Omar Abaye, Hareini ke ben Azai b'shukei Tiveria. This is an expression. Abaye was an Amora. He lived hundreds of years after Ben Azai, who was a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva. Ben Azai, in his generation, was a very sharp scholar. He had practically no competitors in terms of his level of sharpness, of intelligence. And when he went out to the markets of Tavera, he was open, he was willing to answer any question. So Abaye felt very good on a given day, and he said, I feel like Ben Azai, when he was walking the markets of Tiberia, willing to answer any question. So, a question comes. Here's some anonymous individual comes and asks Abaye the following case. Shnei chalolim ze al gabi ze, two corpses, murder victims, one lying on top of the other. Mehechon hu modein. From where does the measurement to the closest city take place? You have to have a starting point, so you have to start from a certain part of this arrangement, these two corpses. Where do you start from? There are three possibilities. Usually in Gemaras you find Aleph, Oy, Dilma, Beis. Like A, O, Dilma, or maybe B. Here we're going to say Aleph, O, Dilma, Beis, O, Dilma, Gimel. It's an unusual structure, but you know it ahead of time. So where this Hahum Rabbanan asks Abaye concerning these two corpses, where do you start the measurement from? Min b'mino have tamun umin b'mino lo haveitzof ume elyon moded? Do you say two like entities? Here you have two human bodies. That's called min b'mino. They're the same substance, so to speak. So min b'mino, do you say that in a case where you have two items of the same nature, one covering the other, that creates tamun? And we know that if a body is tamun, we saw machlokes tanoim about that. According to our Mishnah, I should say no. Let me retract. We saw machlokes tanoim concerning tamun by the shikha, but as far as our Mishnah is concerned, and as far as the Gemara is concerned, everyone holds that tamun is exempt from eglo arufa. So, do we say that in a min b'mino, two bodies, one on top of the other, the bottom one is considered tamun? That would mean it's exempt. It's not part of the mitzvah of egla rufa. And min b'mino lo havitzaf. But the upper one is, even though it's not directly on the floor, but since it's one in the same substance, it's two human bodies, the upper one is not considered sof, meaning above the surface. It's one continuum down to the floor. Ume elyon moded, and as such, if you say that the upper one is not sof, so I would be entitled to measure from the upper one. Let's continue with the other possibilities. Oy dilma min b'mino have sof, umin b'mino lo have tamun? Or do you say that two like substances, the upper one is considered sof, so that would already put it out of your mind from egla rufa. However, min b'mino doesn't create tamun. Umitachton moded. And if you say that, if you accept this approach, then the bottom one is not considered covered over because it's min b'mino. It's covered by its own substance, its own like substance is considered one continuum. Oy dilma. Or the third possibility, min b'mino have tamun, that the lower body is considered tamun, it's excluded, and umin b'mino have sof, and the upper one is considered sof, it's not on the floor, it's not directly on the floor. And if you say that, velo mitachton moded, velo me'elyon moded, you're not going to measure from either body. In other words, there's not going to be a case of egla arufa if you accept possibility gimel. Omar lei. So Abaye answers,